Well, I like my cultural background is Japanese, Korean, and German. So I usually like the three. But I usually when someone is asking me like how I would describe myself, I would usually say I have a rather German personality. At least that's what people have been told me over the years. When I lived in 8 countries, and people always told me like, ah, Pia, you're so very German. I can tell you don't look German about the way you act and talk. And in Britain, people often said like, that's really rude the way you speak. And I'm like, no, I'm just German. It's just, we just say what we mean and we mean what we say. I think I'm in the middle right now, like having lived in like Great Britain. I think doing small talk sometimes is nice, but also exchanging information is also a good thing. So I think I'm more like in the middle. Sometimes I see the benefit of small talks, and then I see the benefit of just exchanging information.
And what about the sort of the Japanese the Japanese Korean background? Do you find that they are further than the Germans or further than the English? I mean, how does it work with them?
Well, usually people say that the Japanese are like more similar to the German, not in the way they like, the way they're like organized and on time. It's probably coming down to like discipline, this kind of thing. And Koreans are usually like more compared to the Greek or like the Italians. Yes, like I remember there's this Korean guy who told me like Korean people are a bit like a tea kettle, it's just like they just heat up quickly.
But I mean, if I can focus this a little bit on something like dyslexia, for instance, this sounds like it might be relevant, because one of the issues with dyslexia is what we call executive functioning. It's ordering, it's time management, it's getting sequences right. Therefore, in a culture that values punctuality and everything being in the right place at the right time, does being dyslexic mean that it's harder to fit into a culture like that than it might be to fit into a culture like, I don't know, you're saying the Korean culture where punctuality isn't valued quite as much as it would be in Japan or Germany?
Well, I think Koreans are still like on time, even though they're more like flexible in a way that for a German person it's really stressful, because we like to have everything like in order, and we want to know like almost 2 years in advance what's going on. And Koreans, you have to be a bit more like flexible in a way.
This idea of time stress, punctuality stress, as somebody with dyslexia, I find that really, really difficult. The more you can remove time stresses from me, the easier I can function.
Mm.
Do you find maybe, or would you think maybe that being dyslexic would be harder in a culture with time stress than maybe without?
Maybe because people are like putting more pressure on you on being like punctual. For example, in Germany, we like to be on time, and on time usually means 10 minutes earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So I could imagine that if you're like living in a country that allows you to be more flexible with time, that could take some of the pressure, because people won't be as strict against you. Like in Germany, it's like, oh, why are you late? And you're wasting my time. And it's very disrespectful, and on and on and on it goes. And I could imagine that it's more stressful. Certainly, like to the people I talked to, they certainly found like they themselves more like stressed in a way, with like this tacting and on time and scheduling and getting things right.
The Germans have a view of dyslexia, or is it that different states in Germany have different views of dyslexia? I mean, how is dyslexia looked upon in Germany?
I can't really say whether there's like the difference. Like I can't really like speak for all the states, because obviously I've only ever lived in Baden-Württemberg. But for like talking to people, the one thing I can say is basically that dyslexia is seen as a disability. So for a lot of people, it's problematic when you talk about dyslexia, because when you say disability, people imagine usually someone like who's sitting in a wheelchair, and but in Germany, you kind of need this kind of labeling of disability in order to get some, government like funding. So yeah, and the problem is that dyslexia it's invisible. So for a lot of people, there's a challenge how to react, and I think there's still a shame surrounding it in a way, because people still think you're stupid or lazy, or that they don't believe you, they belittle you, you have like a low IQ. I mean, comments I have dealt with was something like, deal with it, or you don't have to study, or you be better organized, or you should not encourage people with disabilities to study, or I'm an adult, so I should have outgrown it. And someone also told me that, well, yeah, shit happens, a wheelchair user also dreaming of becoming a baseball pro. So these kind of, so and also like people at work, it really depends on your boss. But I know a lot of people are afraid of saying, of just speaking out about being public with dyslexia, because they're still afraid that it will be viewed in a very negative way. And also, like, if you're talking to like HR, very often they're not even aware of what kind of help is available if need to. And I also spoke to certain, to employers, and talking about them, whether they would, hire a person with dyslexia. And I was like, people told me that it really depended on the job. For example, if you're like in graphics design, IT engineering, or like architecture, people had less of a problem. But like in areas where you had to write a lot, or for example, like banking or like customer support or marketing, like people were less declined to hire dyslexic people, which basically suggests that dyslexic people can only work in certain jobs, which is not true. But it just emphasizes this this kind of problem. And also, like, because there's a lot of dyslexic people who are like insecure themselves, because they hear this kind of thing, then they're just asking themselves, so this is the only thing I can basically work is IT and engineering, but what if I'm not interested in IT or engineering? So I'd say, like, in Germany it's much better than when I was a child, certainly. And more people know about dyslexia, but I'd say there's still a lot of like it's shrouded in mysteries. There's lots of people who don't exactly know what dyslexia means, and so that's why I get all these unfortunate comments.
And this insecurity that people have about coming out of the closet about dyslexia is partly the combination of the mystery, the lack of awareness, and the negative perception of dyslexia. I mean, I just to mention again, I mean, I love Germany. I've lived in Germany, and I absolutely love the place. But when I came out of the closet in my company in Germany, suddenly everything that could have gone wrong was my fault. Because, I became the scapegoat, the Prügelknabe, if you like. I became the scapegoat for everything.
Yeah.
And then when I returned to England, I took I wanted to continue my German language, and I took a course, and there was a German teacher there, and everything was spoken in English, and we were given lots of printed sheets of paper and photocopied sheets of paper of grammar in German. And I remember saying to her at the end of lesson 2, look, thanks very much, this is great, but it's not really how I learn because I'm dyslexic. And she said, oh, I understand all about dyslexia. And the next week she came into the class, gave everybody a handout. And as she walked past me, said, but not you, because you're dyslexic. And then walked on. So I understand this idea that maybe a lack of awareness or a negative perception of dyslexia is it can stress people who've got dyslexia about being open about themselves.
Yes, unfortunately, that's still the case.
Especially in a culture which values punctuality and order and getting things right in the right way.
Yeah, I think Germany is very it stresses a lot on these kind of things.
Yeah. Whereas for instance, in Japan, do they look at dyslexia in the same way in Japan or Korea? Is it the same?
Before I start talking about Japan, I just have to explain this kind of like a dual concept, like in order to explain some cultural values. So in Japan, you have this distinction between soto, which means outside, and uchi, which means like inside and home. To give like a very simplified explanation, and there's like this kind of division in groups versus out groups, and that is very often prominent in the Japanese consciousness of how human relations are working out, and it's basically defined by case by case. So basically, your family would be like uchi, it's like an in group, and a foreigner could be soto, but also maybe a disabled person could be viewed as soto in a way. And then you also have something that connects to uchi and soto. It's hone and tatemai. And hone, it's basically your real face, and it basically refers to someone's real opinions or feelings, and tatemai is your public face. So you just express what is socially acceptable, and you keep them both separate. So in a way, if you're like uchi, like in group, you can be hone, like show your real face, you can state your real opinion. But if you're like soto outside, and you have to be like tatemai, like using your public face, avoid saying things in a direct way. It's less so with the younger generation, but it's still like very much around. And I think you need to take these kind of words into considerations in order to understand how Japanese like they function or think, the way they react.
And so, sorry, would it be the case that you might talk to your close family about your dyslexia, but you would never talk to your boss about dyslexia?
Yes, pretty much so. But even the family, that it could be a bit in this way like problematic because they may not be as understanding.
Yeah.
In Japanese, there's no equivalent word to dyslexia. The Japanese use the word gakushu shogai, which means learning disability. And the problem is that shogai is also often associated with like an intellectual problem. So some people like think that it's like a weakness of character, or like you're a nervous person. In any case, it can be shameful, and people will increase their social distance to you. And it's even more so difficult because you're living in a social environment, which is difficult because as an individual, you must act as it is deemed socially appropriate. And it is difficult to be different from others. And there's like because of that, there's a lot of suffering because, there's a lot of shame attached because people choose not to discuss their problems. And I remember even like the way people look at someone who's using a wheelchair, it's a really sometimes like something that disgusting look like, why are you sitting in a wheelchair? Why are you using up so much space, And often I realize that people apparently don't know how to communicate with people who have disabilities, regardless of wheelchair or this, dyslexia or whatever. And then so they're basically shying away from talking. Then there's little interaction taking place, and then you also realize it's difficult to have role models because if you're not talking about it, if people don't see what you can do, then they're just stuck in their like mindset. And it's difficult to give them hope,
I was going to say something you mentioned once. I remember, and I think it was in one of your interviews, about wondering whether there were any Japanese dyslexic role models. And I went onto the internet for an hour looking for Japanese dyslexic role models, and I couldn't find one.
Yes, the same for me. Like I looked through like, actors, actresses, etc., like scientists, anything, same for Korea, but I couldn't find a single one. Like even for like for Black people, you have like, there are some out there, but I'm still looking for some. So in case you come across something, please tell me because I'm really curious. I've asked Korean people and they say they don't know.
Yeah. And it's not about the language because there are Chinese dyslexic role models. So it's not about the non-alphabetic language. It seems to be a cultural thing. Yes,
definitely. And something that I found was really highlighting the issue was the Sagamihara stabbing in 2016. It was like a care home, and 19 people were killed and 26 were injured. Now, obviously, we're talking about a cared home, but there was lots of criticism because the police never made it like the faces public, or nothing except gender and age. And as if they've never existed, and they said that many families wanted to hide them. They didn't want to be public about the fact that they had maybe some disabled relatives in the home. There was only one family who was open because you can still suffer stigma, so the families share the shame. So you prefer the dead to remain anonymous, not admitting that one of your relatives was lived in a care home. And there's also this one prominent ruling member, her name is Seiko Noda, and she has a disabled son, and there's lots of netizens shaming her that she's wasting taxpayers, or that someone even said that she should let her son die because he's using up all the government money. I mean, right now we're not talking about dyslexic people, but it's just an idea about about disability, the attitude towards disability.
Yeah.
And but I have to say that progress has been made, and there has been more promotion and tolerance of diversity and individualism within Japanese society. That goes mainly back to parental activism, because there were like lots of Japanese people outside of Japan, like they had kids studying in the USA or UK, and they saw what is possible for those kids, and then they returned and said, I want to have the same, my kids should have the same possibilities in Japan. But also, like, the government has stepped up with certain initiatives, including various educational programs. And so there has been like a positive move to start a Zen like a framework of regular classes, but still the focus is more on blind people, or like, you know, deaf, like people who are like deaf and or have like a hard of hearing. Can you say
Yeah,
that?
hard of hearing. Yeah. Having talked to a few Japanese people in general believe that dyslexia doesn't exist in Japan. Now, I've actually heard very good explanations for why. That if dyslexia is a phonological processing problem and you don't process phonologically with Japanese writing, then there is no phonological processing problem in Japan. Is that the prevailing idea about dyslexia in the country?
For example, like historic wise, that in the late 19th century, like the Meiji era, it's 1868 to 1912, there was an externalization of children who did not match the type to other, and they were basically isolated from the mainstream school system. So I've thought that maybe that may also be like a, you know, reason that because they were externalized, that they just vanished in a way, like they were invisible. So people didn't see like children with disabilities, you know. In Japan, like Kobe, he was the first person to recognize a case of dyslexia in 1957.
Yeah.
But even by 1996, there had not been a concept of learning disability had not been established in Japan by 1996. So as you can see, it's only started in the 1990s slowly that you know, learning disabilities have received growing attention and recognition, but there's still also like a lack of information. So it may be also difficult because of the way of assessment, how to identify dyslexia in Japanese, but also the lack of information, because until very recently there has not been like a lot of, you know, scholarship around, and also because it's like a taboo subject and people don't talk about it. So I think it's like a combination of a lot of things, and also like Japanese school teachers very often don't know about it. I read a study, it's from 2012, but it's the news I could find, and it is stated that 68% of the teachers didn't even know about dyslexia. So that's quite a lot.
Yeah, there's I think I quote that study in the Dyslexia Bytes website. It's quite shocking, and yet at the same time, education in Japan is quite good, isn't it? Education in Japan is usually lauded as extremely high quality.
It is, yeah.
Yeah.
But I guess it's just difficult. Also, if you have 30 to 40 kids in one class, it's just there's a chance that you may not spot the kid, you know, the kid in need. Even if they heard about dyslexia, there's lots of teachers who don't know whom to ask for support, or they don't even know that support exists. Or even teachers may shy away from the child because they're too afraid, because they think they're not able to understand the child's needs.
What would they do typically in school? So if in school, let's say primary school, they found out that I was dyslexic, would they continue to educate me and expect me to do better? Or would they take me out of class and put me into a different class? Or how would they, do they have what we would call in England a SENCO, a special educational needs coordinator, or in Spain, for instance, a school psychologist? How would they deal with that in a school then?
Also, from one of people told me that there's like certain people who have taken their kids out and they're now attending international schools because they're apparently more open. Then there are some people told me like that school was exceptionally committed to dyslexia, and they were able to have the kids in class, but also getting like extra support for the, you know, teachers were involved. But there were also like cases where where they just simply ignore you, you know, and they just think you like it's like an invisible wall in a way. They just ignore you and just tell you, okay, you just have to study harder, you're lazy, and you just practice more and take extra classes. So it really differs depending on the school, basically.
And yet with the Japanese writing system, now I don't know much about the Japanese writing system. I believe that there's more than one writing system or more than one alphabet. Yes. Is that correct?
Yes, you have basically the like hiragana and katakana, and it's like the syllabic writing system, and then you have the kanji, which is like the logographic system of writing. Yeah.
And
And
these pose different problems to Japanese dyslexic people, or they're really easy for dyslexic people in Japan? How does that work?
something I've once found out, I thought it was quite interesting that when writing in the katakana and hiragana, the prevalence of dyslexia was estimated to be lower than that of you when you're using kanji. But the funny thing is, it's a bit different. Basically, when you're writing in kanji, you have different problems than when you're writing hiragana and katakana. The thing is, right now I can't really speak from personal experience because I didn't really have like problems myself. Actually, I found it easier to learn Japanese than English, which is something I've heard from many other people. But I think I'm not an expert enough on phonological issues.
Well, maybe from your experience, can you say you found it easier to learn Japanese than English? What about German? What about learning German? Was that easier or was that harder?
Well, speaking, obviously, it's like my mother tongue, so that wasn't a problem. But like writing, absolutely terrifying, because everyone just told me that my grades were like super bad when it came to writing, and I was just leaving out words, and people just couldn't understand why I just couldn't get it right, you know. And I had like, I think in total I had like 30 tutors who just tried to teach me like maths and sequencing and just the way, you know, like just proper spelling, and I never could get it right. So I thought, I always like hated German classes, you know, writing essays and these kind of things. It's absolutely terrifying.
Same with me. But I mean, it seems from what I understand about Japanese is that certainly Chinese, which is the kanji, is it? Did you say?
Yes, it's basically kanji are derived from the Chinese.
This is logographic, and so you're using a different part of your brain to read these these letters, let's call them, to read these signs, and yet you have to learn more of them, and so it's sort of you lose something and you gain something. With English and German is far heavier on the grammar than English, and you have to get the grammar right. But English spelling, of course, is extraordinarily difficult because it's not orthographic, and so I can understand the difference there. In German schools, the pressure to succeed has got to be enormous, I guess. Is that true?
I guess one of the problems for dyslexic people is that because of Germany's decentralized educational system, you have like, you know, you have basically 16 different federal states. That means 16 different sets of regulations, 16 different rules for official diagnosis, and 16 different kinds of rules about learning disabilities. That doesn't really help. So there's a lot of, let's just say the system is rigid. Basically, you have primary school, and when you're like around age 10, then you're being put on different tracks. So there's like Hauptschule, which is basically for like blue collar jobs. Then you have Realschule, which is like one step
slightly more
like up. It's for intermediate students, like white collar positions, but you're not going to college. And then you have like gymnasium, and that's basically for students headed for college. I mean, nowadays it's easier to switch a track, but when I was a kid, you needed a recommendation from the teacher, and which would basically put you on one of the different tracks.
And of course, these are genuinely different schools. They're not different classes within the same school. That's how I understand it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
So
different schools.
In order to switch from Hauptschule to Gymnasium, for instance, you have to change school, leaving your friends behind. So there's going to be social difficulties doing that.
Yes.
So in order for a dyslexic child to make it to Gymnasium, which is what we might have called in the old days in English grammar school, in order for a dyslexic child to make it to grammar school, sort of the school that can get you to university, they have to have been given the support in the primary school. The Grundschule.
Yes.
What kind of support is there available for people with dyslexia in these primary schools?
Well, first of all, if you're younger than 18, then you probably have to see like a child and youth psychotherapist, in order to, because you need a medical referral from a pediatric. Oh, that's difficult word.
Pediatric, yeah. Or pediatrician.
Pediatrician, sorry.
Yeah.
And sometimes the Department of Children and Family Service pays for it, but very often they do not. And your financial coverage is also not covered by your health insurance. So very often parents have to pay out of their own pockets. So depending on your social background, it can give you an advantage or disadvantage. But yeah, there's like different kinds of help you can get. Well, for example, you can get special support in written examinations, special fonts, remedial classes, figures and tables, and of course you can get help outside of school, like therapy lessons, private schools paid by your parents, and health insurance offers also some kind of apps. Schools, usually they're not very resourceful, and it's often difficult to access the resources, and they're limited. And of course, if we have like an overall lacking that teachers are not trained, especially mainstream schools, like teachers, they don't have the time or to observe children, and they won't find out about dyslexic children or children in need overall. So some teachers are helpful in understanding. Then there are also teachers who will call you like stupid, or they will just say you work on your handwriting. And they also sometimes think that if you get help, then you're just going to lean back and rest on it. And but again, what kind of help is available to you depends on the state. Also in primary school it's quite good. In secondary school it depends on the state, because a lot of times help will stop after the 4th grade. That's usually when children switch to one of the three different tracks. And there's also not all states have school legislation in place for pupils with dyslexia when you're like between grade 6th to 10th grade. And for some states at secondary level there's no more modified assessment conditions, and sometimes you can get an exemption, but then there will be a comment on your school report. There have been people like in Bavaria fighting the comment, because obviously you don't want to have this kind of comment on your school report, because it could have like negative implications when you're trying to find a job or on to study. But they were not successful.
So they were like almost marked down for having dyslexia.
In a way, yeah, not all states do it, but yes, and very often you have to take legal actions. It's very difficult in Germany in the future. Like, is missing almost 26,000 teachers in the near future. So that's also a problem, which means teachers in the future will like some of them will not have studied. For being teachers, they will come from different like walk of life, which means they will have even less sort of like a background of teaching.
And I'm guessing that certain states of Germany, especially maybe those states in the south of Germany, are going to have issues with a growing number of immigrants in their classes as well. And these are going to have, as it were, cultural effects on how a lesson is taught and how the teacher therefore deals with all of these different children. And I don't know whether there's any provision put in place for understanding learning needs within a culturally fluid environment. It's going to be quite hard.
So some of the classes, that's like up to 95% of like not like non-German children, which is like problematic, because like parents will automatically send the German children to different schools, and then these kind of children are like just amongst themselves.
Ghettoization almost.
Yes. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. And that's a problem. Yeah.
And I know I was talking to one person who deals with immigrant issues in a part of Bavaria, and he was saying that a lot of the immigrant families send their children to schools that are hardly academic at all. They concentrate on sports or something. And that might be fine, but it seems to be restrictive. It seems to be restrictive choices for them. And that's...
if they're like the ghettoization you talked about previously, it's problematic, because the chance that one of these children will go on the track that will lead to the gymnasium and later on to study at university, it's one thing I maybe would like to add is about the Korean system and about this like the school system in a way, because just to give you a better understanding about how dyslexia can affect like people in the Korean school system. So basically, in Korea you have a saying that if you sleep 5 hours, you'll fail the test, and if you sleep 4 hours, you'll pass the test. And children study up to 16 hours a day, and that includes, like for example, when you're done with school, many children attend, like, it's called Hagwon. It's like a cram school, and they're taking revision classes, and 80% of kids are attending one. And because in Korea, it's basically, there's like a standard, yeah, like a national university entrance exam. It's called a Sunung, and it's a bit equivalent to the SAT in the USA. But I've had a lot of teachers emphasize that if you fail Sunung, it's basically the rest of your life will be a failure. And in many respects, it does, because the results not only determines your future in a way, like which university you will attend, but also it determines who you meet and may end up marrying, your job prospects, and the overall respect you and your family will receive. It's also like on the day of when Sunung takes place, you have like a taxi and police cars who are ready for those kids who are like late to school, so they will just like bring these kids to school. And also like the city adjusts, like shops open later, and office hours are like later, like for an hour, in order to not cause like all the commotion. And you will see a lot of mainly mothers praying at temples and churches. This year Sunung will take place on December the 3rd, and the thing is that 70% of the people will go on to study at a university, but less than 2% will attend the so-called SKY. SKY is an acronym for the Korea's top-tier Ivy League. It's like Seoul National University, Korea University, and Yonsei University. And why is it so important to attend high-ranked school in Korea? Because, you know, if you're trying to survive in a society, for example, when your parents are you're a doctor and you have to become a doctor yourself, or like a high-ranking government official, or people want to work at the big corporations. It's like the conglomerates. It's called chaebol in Korean, and you know the big ones like Samsung, LG, Hyundai. In Germany, people actually pronounce it Hyundai, but it's pronounced Hyundai actually.
Oh, we call it Hyundai in English. Okay.
Yeah, and it's Hyundai in Korean. So yeah, and 70% of the CEOs are from large companies. Graduated from the SKY universities. And you will also get judged based on your degree and where you got it from. And there's a lot of comparison to others, you know, like when all your friends attended one and you did not, and you know, your parents are also like, and actually the history why Korean people are obsessed with all this learning is, for example, you have like a culture of academia, and under the Goryeo and Joseon dynasties starting in the 10th century, royal courts conducted a national civil service examination called Gwagyo, preparing candidates for a career in government service. It was only abolished in around 1894, something like that. And also people believe that, you know, back in the 60s, Korea's GDP was below that of Ghana. And so education was a main source of social mobility, you know, and the state wanted to raise its citizenry to a shared standard of education. So it's like investing in human capital. And I think for a dyslexic person, it's very problematic that Koreans are very fond of standardized exams as an objective measure for your qualifications, because they value unity and they're comfortable when everyone is judged on the same basis. And so the testing students remains within tight boundaries. It's sequencing, teaching by rote. It's all about memorization skills, and it discourages people's creativity. And students are also not taught outside the box. So and you know, it doesn't even stop there. So when you are so for a lot of white collar roles like civil service, journalism, chaebols, it again requires extensive examinations again. You could see, like, if you're a dyslexic, how difficult it would be to succeed, like memorization, learning by rote.
But it is interesting because Korea always comes out really high in terms of results for schools, but it doesn't necessarily come out really high in terms of emotional, sort of the emotional evaluation, how happy and comfortable people feel at school.
Well, suicide is among the leading causes of death among Koreans aged 15 to 24, and also 10 to, like, there was like, I remember that one, like, where like a 10-year-old girl, like, I think she was 10 or was she 8, like she jumped, in any case, she jumped to her death because she just couldn't handle taking all the school lessons. You would just think at age 8 or 10, you should not commit suicide. It's like,
God. Yeah,
they're really good when it comes to, you know, learning, but I think there's something missing, like the human element in a way. For me, it's missing out.
That whole thing about child suicide is horrifying, isn't it? Absolutely horrifying.
It is.
Yeah.
It is like, I know in Korea it's extremely high. There's also like this bridge spanning the Han River, and it's infamous for people committing suicide. Now they have like put like pictures in place, like, you know, or like baby pictures, puppy pictures, or like even nice text, you know, just to make people like, you know, maybe people want to change their minds. But I'm always thinking, yeah, but maybe it would be more, instead of putting up pictures, I mean, it's one thing, but something else would be maybe more helpful.
Yeah, changing the structures of the education system that drive people to suicide, for instance.
Yeah, or being able to openly say that you're going to see like a psychologist.
Yeah. Openly having the ability to openly have a conversation about learning differences, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Yeah. Is there one thing in your experience you wish had been different about your school experience, and then from school transitioning into work? Because I mean, you're a coach as much as anything else, and so I'm guessing that being a coach, you haven't taken a traditional route from school into work. You've gone a slightly different way. So.
Yeah, I often think it would have been great if my dyslexia would have been spotted when I was a child. Because I always wanted to become an aerospace engineer, and dyslexia made sure that I never became an aerospace engineer, because it was only spotted in the UK actually when I was in my early 20s at university. People never thought about dyslexia, and then and that was basically when I was sent off to a British boarding school. And I'm always thankful. That's why I'm always so thankful about the UK, and I'm always like happy about how advanced they are in comparison to Germany.
Wow.
Because it basically rescued my like career in a way that it basically was too late to become an aerospace engineer, but it made sure that I could go on to study at university, which by the age of 15 had thought would not have been possible, because I always would have become like a school dropout.
How did you feel when you were assessed as being dyslexic, by the way?
At first I was kind of happy, because I finally knew my like adversary in a way, and I have to call it adversary because dyslexia had caused me a great many problems in my life until then. Back then I could certainly not call it a gift in any way. And so at first I was quite happy, but then I also became really like angry in a way, because then, you know, it was like because of dyslexia I couldn't become like this and that, and then like so many problems, and so I had to get used to like being dyslexic in a way first of all, and then also like overcome this kind of the way of thinking. Then until then the way of thinking it was something similar to nothing really works out, and I can't do this and that. And I also had a teacher when I was 12, and she told me, you will never be able to speak English in your life. And yeah, I met her 10 years later, and I set records straight. I said, okay, listen. And she was so embarrassed, and she walked out of the supermarket.
So she should be, yeah.
Yeah, and I thought it was really just, you can't say that to someone, right?
I got it all the time at school. You'll never do this, you'll never do this, you'll never do this. It's disheartening.
Yeah. And I think that's something as a dyslexic you have to unlearn because you've been told all your life you can't do this, you can't do that, so you have to unlearn this kind of way of thinking, and you have to become more positive about it. Now I am of course far more positive, but no, you know, now and then I have my days where I feel a bit rather ungrateful still. I'm just like, damn it, why? You know, that's just, you know, sometimes, but exactly. But yeah, I don't think I still wouldn't call dyslexia a gift. For me, it's more like a balance, you know. It is like pros and cons.
As I always say, there are gifts associated with dyslexia, and there are negatives associated with dyslexia.
Yes.
It's not a disability, but it's not a superpower. There are pros and cons, absolutely.
Exactly. So for me, this kind of way that I know a lot of people are calling it superpower these days, and it may very well be a superpower for some, but for me, like, if I think about superpower, I think about like one of the like Marvel heroes, like Superman or Batman, or maybe like a witch, like a wizard. I can be like all powerful, and it feels very exclusive also, you know. I don't feel like I'm included. And the first time when someone told me that's like a superpower, I was like, I don't feel like it's a superpower. I don't feel included, and I felt actually stressed out because superpower, like calling it superpower, put so much pressure on me.
You've got to then live up to that. Yeah, if you've got a superpower and you can't actually fly, that makes you feel worse.
Exactly. Yeah. Even nowadays, when I'm talking to people, I have a more balanced view.
I'm going to ask you one final question, and it's I think just to contextualize this question, I have lived in a number of different countries, and I find good and bad in all of them, and I love the countries and the people I've lived in and with, in very broadly similar and very broadly different ways. And the same with you, I'm guessing you have cultural understanding of Japan and Korea and Germany, and to an extent Britain as well. And I know you're very positive and you've got a very positive view. So, I mean, but if you can compare maybe how dyslexia is looked upon in Germany, how it's looked upon in Japan, how it's dealt with in Germany, how it's dealt with in Japan, what would you say the big similarities and differences are? And which do you find better or worse, or is that the wrong language to use?
Like, I attended like some like primary school years in Korea, and I attended a university in Japan, and I attended like primary and secondary school in Germany. So there's all like different
places,
and it's been a long time since then. So the thing is, I think I'd say the difference is that in Germany you can be more open about it. Like Germany is more open when it comes to disabilities overall, let's just say like this, and you're not looked upon as like something strange or something out of place. You're not like a soto, you know. And I think it's the same, like, and also in Japan and Korea, it's just like in the coming, and it's, you know, like there's nowadays people have heard about dyslexia also like in Japan and Korea, but most people, but I think that goes for most countries, that most people don't really know what dyslexia is anyways. They don't really have a clear understanding about it. But I'd say I'd be far more open about dyslexia in Germany than I would ever be in Japan or Korea. I mean, I tried to be open in Japan once, and then someone asked whether I was like mentally retarded, and then I thought, okay, maybe I'm just leaving it at that, because I
shouldn't laugh because I know what that can do to people, but wow.
Yeah, so I was just like, okay, so, and you know, back then I was still a student, and I just didn't feel it. I was in the, you know, I didn't feel comfortable to disclose my dyslexia anymore. Yeah. So it was like a try that failed. Maybe I should have tried more, but you know, it was just like, in Germany, I think I'm far more likely to open up about dyslexia when I'm talking to strangers. In Korea and Japan, I'm first testing the waters in a way. I'm like trying to figure out about it, you know, the person, and then I'm just, you know, going to start saying, you know, yeah, okay, and